Hey, Hino. Good afternoon. So I don't know if anyone here attended the panel last night for Making Comics. No worries. I was just curious if anyone had attended that panel. That one was by someone else. The one earlier today. I did do the one last night, though. I am still working on the comics that we came up with from last night. I'm still planning to have that up on my Twitter later. And now it's officially after 2 o'clock, so I'll go ahead and get started. So yes, this is a panel on drawing furries. It's mostly concerned with body structure and general features. A lot of what we're going to be covering is your basics of anatomy, how to take human style anatomy and then kind of convert it into furry anatomy. And I know that people frown upon looking at references, but I will say right from the get-go that I do very much recommend using references for your work. It's very useful, and if you're unsure, going to websites, I would recommend Senshi Stock on DeviantArt is a really good pose reference. Um, they have a lot of variety, and it's mostly free. So never be afraid to use actual references for your work. So I don't know why there's this whole stigma against the idea of looking at reference images. Reference images are here to help. So I'm going to start with the face. Just some general layout tips for doing faces of different kinds. If people have different types of animal anatomy they want to see, like digigrade legs, beaks, anything and like that, just feel free to go ahead and list it in the chat room, and I'll do my best to cover it. So I don't know, when I was getting started, one of the things I always showed was that whole circle with the cross trick. Have you seen that? Well, it took me ages before I figured out why this is actually useful. So, one thing to keep in mind, and I'm going to do a human head shape here for a second, just for a quick reference, is when you make these lines, what you're doing is you're breaking down the structure of the head. So if you were to actually put a human head in here, and forgive my poorly drawn skull, but you would have your eyes here, side of your face here, and then your jaw here. And the reason this kind of thing is important is it just kind of gives you an idea of the planes of the head. And we cheat by doing just the little cross trick. It establishes what the angle of your face is, and it gives you some cheating lines. For example, I always do the first line, and from there I'll build the rest of my lines. So if you're talking about like muzzle structure, this line here, your center line, is where a lot of your face is built around. So for example, you would put your eyes here on this center line, the bottom of your eyes. And then the muzzle in most animals would start at the center line as well. When it comes to cheeks, your cheeks will usually also begin here at the center line and go towards the jaw. And then for animals with like pointy ears, you'll usually want to have the ears start, the base of the ears around the center line. So you can see that this center line is actually really useful for basing where you want all your pieces to kind of start and connect. A couple of other quick tricks is usually if you have an animal with basically standard distance between the ears, and I'm making hand gestures that you cannot see, so apologies for that. Anything with the standard amount of space here between the ears, if you follow that down, it should be right about where your eyes are. So this distance should be similar to this distance here. Now, who has trouble doing the muzzle from the front or faces from the front in general? I know that was always the bane of my existence, doing muzzles from the front. That's why I used to draw animals with short muzzles, and just like, nah, you know what? You'll only ever see them from 3/4 because I'm not drawing that. It's a relatable issue, right? So if you take the base structure and you go ahead and add in like details, like here's your ears, here's your eyes, I'll show you a couple of tricks for establishing a longer muzzle from the front. So let's say we're doing like a cat. Cat has a shorter muzzle, it should be easier to do, right? So what you'll do at this point is, this might sound stupid, but just take a circle here like you're doing like a lucha mask, and you say, okay, this is where I want my muzzle to end, and then you put in like your nose. Here's your nose. That's not a very cat-like nose here. And then like your face here. And then what you'll want to do, give me a different brush, maybe a brush that isn't like 300 pixels wide. Okay, so I have my basic structure that I was using for the lucha muzzle. Put my nose in it. And then I make a line here. That spot I was talking about before, that center line on the face. And then I take my line and I connect it forward to my circle. And then I use the circle to build the rest of my muzzle. Then I have my cheeks. And from the far point of your cheek here, the furthest out point, you'll then slope back down towards your chin. Right? The thing is, there's a lot of ways to do things that'll make your art easier to do. That's why we come up with formats like this silly face cross thing. Yeah, you see people do it, but unless you understand why people do it, it's not really a useful tool. So from there, I go ahead and add the rest of my face. And voila. Now let's say we wanted to do an animal with a longer muzzle, right? That's the real trick here, is doing an animal with a much longer muzzle, because it's hard. It frankly is. Okay, so we'll still use this base shape here. I'm going to go ahead and just redraw a base circle. Center line. And here's what you do for that. Let's say we want to do like a wolf, right? Something with a bigger, like a blunter muzzle. What we want to do is determine how far forward we want the muzzle to come. I really recommend for your standard wolf or canine of that species, look at this distance here, right? Split that in half. And what you'll do is make a blunt muzzle shape. So, right? Here's your center line. This is your line between the eyes. Now take this line and follow it all the way forward to the front. Go ahead and add your nose. And then that becomes your muzzle shape here. And then, as before, go ahead and follow your cheeks out. And then from there, and there you have a longer muzzle. It really can. You can pretty much apply it because it's not really anything to do with the style. It's just a matter of measurements and degrees. If you have a really exaggerated style, you may make the muzzle bigger. You may, change the shape of it, but it should still be able to connect these points to make it look like, uh, a muzzle. Now, let's say you have a character that has a muzzle that starts higher up. Who's ever done that before? Like a horse or another type of character. Especially common in herbivores and critters with hooves, where they don't have like let's say a wolf from this side looks like this, right? And then you get some animals from the side and they look more like this. And you're like, what the heck? How do I translate this weird horse face shape to front look? And usually the answer to that is never draw a horse from the front. That's the easiest way. You just like, no, you know what? My horses exist only in side view or 3/4 angles, maybe. That used to be my tactic. And then I worked on some tricks for doing that. So here's your face shape, right? And let's go ahead and make a line here. And this line just determines where the top of the eyes are going to be. And then you'll make a second line here if you want to determine where the eyebrows are going to be. If your character has eyebrows. Now, what you want to do at this point is, here's the top line where your eyes are, right? And you're going to go ahead and make a shape here for where your big old blunt horse muzzle is. And instead of starting the line here, where you would put like your wolf muzzle, you start the line up here. Use your nostrils. Clean that up a little bit so you can see it better. And because the horse jaw here isn't like is pronounced, and because the muzzle is so much bigger, you notice this connecting line will actually go underneath your big old section of your muzzle. And don't be afraid to have it, go underneath that part of your muzzle. Horses actually have ears higher placed, so I would normally place them closer to the eyebrow line here. I know, right? It's surprising how many tricks you realize it, and then it becomes super obvious, and you're like, well, I don't know how I missed that. That was like an easy trick. But yeah, I mean, once you've learned it, it becomes a lot easier, and you can do this with pretty much any type of animal. Just consider how long or short the muzzle is, and then place it accordingly. Now, if you're doing like a bird, you'd probably do the same thing. You would go ahead and start with the exact same structure. My spooky eyes. And let's say I want to do like a parrot. And there you go. I mean, easy trick. Once you know how to use it, you can use it for pretty much anything. The other thing that is great about the face cross trick is, okay, so here's the front view. When you do the profile view, who has this problem? So you'll draw the face and you draw it from the profile, and when you go to look at it, things don't. I have actually a hard time making this look wrong, because I've done it so often. But let's say you do that, and then you look at it, and for some reason, one of your eyes is like at a weird angle, like it's up here instead of, it just doesn't look right, right? So you're like, well, what happened? My eye obviously doesn't fit in the right spot. Well, that's where the face cross can be really helpful too. So what you do is, new layer. Here's your face again. And what you want to do is angle your face cross towards where you want to be facing. So in this case, angling it this way, so the line goes that way. Now that you have this center line, you can build your eyes and stuff around it. So your muzzle will be here. Like this. And then your other eye will be like that. And now everything is facing the right direction, is at the right angle. And that helps you maintain consistency of shape for your character. And the nice thing about a lot of tricks is they are very adaptable. As I said, you can pretty much use this for any style of character. Works for humans, works for furries. As long as your character has any sort of symmetry in the face, um, you can really use this trick pretty easily. And if your character for some reason doesn't have facial symmetry, like for some reason they have like one ear that's bigger, or a horn on one side or something like that, you can still use it to build your base shape and then change the element you need. So if I say, oh, the character has an eyebrow on this side but doesn't have an eyebrow on that side, it's real easy to just leave it out. Or if I say this ear is like messed up, then you could just change that once you have the base shape in there. It's no problem. I actually used to do art instruction. I taught classes on comic making, basic art, animation, a lot of different things. And I feel like a lot of people miss out on teaching people some of the basic tricks. Like they'll assume that because someone is already an artist that they know this kind of thing. And, you know, a lot of people just have never been taught this trick. So, body structure. Oh, helps if I have my layer turned on. I do. My Twitter is. Let's see, grab the link to it here. And if anyone ever wants like one-on-one advice, just wants to ask questions, you feel free to send me a message on Twitter. I'm always available. Well, not always available, but I will always try to reply. Okay, so one easy way to think about body structure is just breaking it down into shapes. And I will say this with the caveat: if if you are doing something really complicated, if you're looking at a different body shape than you're used to, never hurts to have references. Again, references are your friend. I'm never going to tell anyone to not use a reference. Um, so, one of the things I found easiest was when I learned breaking the body down into shapes could help. I did that all the time. So, one thing to keep in mind is you've got a few big shapes you always have to account for. You have here the shoulders and chest, and then you have the hips. Now, based on the gender of your character, and not just on the no, go ahead, uh, and not just the gender, but overall features. Your hips may be wider or smaller. Um, you have your waist in here, so you would have a connection, and it just forms this base shape. And when you have this base shape, you can kind of change it around and say, oh, well, here's chest, here's the hips, and that's like a bent over pose. You know, you can just kind of twist them around however you want. But you have to have these two sections of the body. And a lot of people just accompany them with like, they just do like, oh, here's, little circles that are real quick that establish where my hips and shoulders are. The legs join here. Now, if you were looking at an actual skeleton, you would actually have the pelvic bone here, and they actually join. They have joints here, so you need to keep that in mind where your legs join your body. For a few different species, this will change. This is based on a more human look, and I can show you a couple of things you might do for like lizard characters, animals like that, where they actually have the legs at a different placement. You want to account for all your joints. So in this case, we'd have the elbows, the wrists and hands, knees, feet. Now, as long as you're putting all of these things into your character, you shouldn't run into an issue with like floppy noodle limbs. Just remember, you have to have a bone and a joint for something to bend. So you bend it at different angles. Now, how does that apply to furries? So, looking at your basic human body, here's one thing that I see a lot of people running into. So, who has heard this whole, furry legs are like backwards shtick, where they're like, oh, on furries the knees bend backwards. I've seen people say that before, and they'll be like, that's how a furry foot works. It's just a bent backwards knee, right? Like, oh, this is the knee on a furry. Except no, it's actually not. Here's the thing about a furry knee. Here's a normal human leg, right? Here's the knee, here's the ankle. So looking at next to the furry leg, it sure seems like, yeah, this is the knee and it's bent backwards. But what you're really looking at is here's the hip bone, here's the knee on a digigrade character. This is actually the ankle. And a lot of people think this is a backwards knee for some reason, when in reality, here's a human. A human has this long piece of leg here, and then they have an ankle here, and then they have a foot and toes. And with a digigrade character, the ankle is here, and this long piece is actually the whole top of the foot, And then here's the toes. The joint for the toes is right here. So it has all the same pieces as a human leg. Nothing bends backwards. It's just different lengths of bone that make the leg look different. And that should, just remembering that should keep you from ever drawing a backwards knee and wondering why it looks weird. It's because you can't just have the knee backwards. It actually is just a different placement. Like if you look at, I don't know if you've seen giraffes, right? People are like, oh, well, they must have all these extra bones in their neck. No, it's the same number of bones. They're just longer. So keep that in mind when you're doing your furries. Sometimes it's the same bones, they're just a different structure. I saw BRB and I thought you yelled burb. Another fun thing to do when you're doing your furry shapes. Oh, bats. Okay, so I'm going to use something other than my spray can. So here's your basic bat shape, right? And the thing about bats is that they still have all those elements in their leg, but their legs are like super duper tiny, like short, in an actual bat. And what I really want to do is I kind of want to find a picture. And bats don't really have to like use their legs, so they don't really need powerful legs. But if you're just drawing a bat, yes, I can go over the front-facing digi versus side-facing digi in just a second. This is actually going to be useful for both bat wings and bird wings. So let's say this bat had a human arm, right? You got a bone here. You've got a bone here. And then you've got a bone here, and then you've got a bone here, right? It's actually like... So what do you do to make that into a wing? I'm going to snag this and pull it out of the way. Now, bird wings and bat wings are a little different. I'm going to do bat first, then bird. For a bat, this bone here is elongated. And this bone here is elongated. So here's your elbow. Here's the bones of your hand. And where a bat is different is, yeah, this is Clip Studio Paint. These are the finger bones. And these bones have the finger joints in them. And you won't usually see like the finger joints. It's just good to know that they're there. And then they have a membrane, which is the skin stretched between them. And that's how a bat wing works. And that is why a bat will usually have a smaller digit here. This is actually the thumb. So bats are essentially really big hands. That's their feature. Now, I'm going to go ahead and show you how to do a bird wing, and you'll see that that's different. So let's say I have my bird, right? Ignore my bird feet. So if you look at a bird wing, the bird still has this structure here, right? And then the bird, as there would be the hand, is the elbow. Here's the wrist. And a bird actually has a hand structure here. But unlike on the bat, it's pretty much kind of fused together. It doesn't go very far out into the wing. And the wing itself goes around that. And all of this here, you got this amount of flesh. It's not actually a lot of flesh. The majority of a bird's wing is made up of the feathers. So here's the flesh of the bird's wing, and then you get the long pinion feathers here. And then the other feathers. For easy reference, let me go ahead and like just shrink this a little bit. If you have any questions about Clip Studio Paint, let me know. I have access to lots of tutorials. A good cheaty way of doing bird wings. Think of them as three big kind of ovally structures. You have this one here, this one here, and this one here, right? So these are the wing tips. This is the wing base. And then this is the spot that kind of bends. I think I know what you mean. So you mean like, okay, there's character and the characters, I don't know, like a duck. And the character like is able to do things with their wings, like their feathers, right? The feathers are fingers. So what you would do at this point is, here's the bones you're seeing, right? You kind of draw it as if it was more like a human hand, like a human arm, and then you build. The hand part would be here. You build your feather fingers kind of around that. So this is the central hub of where your fingers will be. The rest of these are just kind of random feathers. But keep in mind that feathers aren't actually like made of bone. So just make sure this hand structure thing is in there, and then you can do all kinds of like fiddly things with your fingers. But only use this portion of the structure to build your hand fingers off of. The rest of these should be regular feathers, or it's going to get confusing for everyone. So if you wanted to read like a hand, you want to use this part where people associate the hand. That I don't know. Okay, now for the other question that people were asking. Did you grade legs from different angles? Now, have you ever seen the lines on a model sheet where they'll be like, oh, here's my character. Go ahead and draw this here. Here's my character. And we'll say our character's name is like Frank. And he's, I don't know, he's an otter. And then they'll do Frank from like another angle, and they'll be like, oh, there's lines here. And you're like, well, why are the lines there, right? Well, here's why the lines exist. So let's say I want to draw Frank from the side. Actually, I should probably pick a different type of animal because Frank actually has plantigrade feet. He's an otter. I'm going to do Francine, and Francine is some kind of dog. Dog ears. Okay. Here's the digigrade legs from the front. What I'll do is I'll go ahead and take my lines and kind of take them across and say, okay, here's Francine from the side. These lines help me establish where her hips are and then where her knees are and where her ankles are. And then you see this is what Francine's legs would look like from the side. Now, let's say you don't have a front-facing reference that you're working from. If you're trying to do Francine from like a 3/4 angle and you don't have like a front image where you can do lines and easily do that. So let's say we're doing a 3/4 angle, right? Here's our 3/4 angle. Face. Now, if your character does not have their body twisted in a different direction, you can cheat and use this face line to make sure everything is angled in the right direction so they're all facing the right way. So here's Francine's chest. Notice that the line here for the neck actually follows the same line as the face. Well, you can also bring this same line down the chest to indicate where the center of the chest is. That line should also come down the center of your belly, down your hips, and now you know that everything on Francine's body is facing in the same direction at the same angle. Here would be like the side of the face. This should also match that. Then you have that matching there. Now, Francine's hips will join her legs here, where this big old X is. So what you do is you'll start the leg structure from there. It'll come forward a little because when you walk on your toes, your front legs tend to be bent. And then we'll come back slightly. This will probably line up about with Francine's butt. And then we'll go down to the floor, and there's where you have your floor, right? So you've basically made this wireframe structure to hang Francine's muscles off. So we'll go ahead and add the structure here, fill it out. And there you have Francine's legs. I'm just checking to see if there was any other questions. People asked for specific things they wanted to see. We're getting a little tight on time, and I want to make sure I cover what people most want to know about. So is there anything else you definitely want to make sure that I cover before the panel is over? Because it comes to anatomy and structure of furries, there's like a lot of different things I could easily go into. So yeah, while I'm on the subject of digigrade characters, remember I drew the horse earlier. A horse functions a lot like this, hooved animals. So you have the same basic structure here. The main difference is actually this part here, which would become a paw with a joint. You actually have the ankle here, and then the hoof here. I don't have any tutorials posted on YouTube. I really should go ahead and do some of those. If I never really thought about it, but if you guys think it'd be useful, I actually enjoy giving tutorials and helping out. Ungulates. And as stated before, once you know the basic structure of this, it's really easy to take this and twist it into a shape that's a little more stylized. Like, let's say you want to do like one of those My Little Pony style hooves. They actually still have the same basic structure as this, but more stylized. And then they also have like a mark on the butt, like, a pencil, because artist. Well, then, I actually believe I signed up for YouTube at one point. I'll have to pull it out and start doing some tutorials. So, if you guys are interested, go ahead and go to my Twitter. I always post my stuff there. Leave me notes on what you'd like to see tutorials about, because I like to hear what people are looking for. Now, I have about 15 minutes, so I'd like to go in and talk on another area people seem to like that no one has mentioned, which is paws. Who likes drawing paws, or who finds drawing paws hard? I mean, hands in general tend to be hard, and I know a lot of people, yeah, a lot of people have issue with both hands and feet. Okay, so first off, I will say, as a disclaimer, that drawing feet is hard no matter what kind of feet you're drawing. Human feet are like one of the hardest parts of a person to draw, and foot paws may actually be a little bit easier than human feet. So I'm going to start with a digigrade paw, and then I'll do a plantigrade paw as well, to just kind of give you um, basic structure on both types of foot paws that you can do. So we know from the earlier part of the tutorial that what you're seeing here is the ankle and then the toes. So keeping this structure in mind as you go forward, your heel is here, your ankle is here, your individual toes are here, and break it down into shapes. So what I'll do here is I'll take the one from the side and say, okay, here's a big cheaty shape that I use to establish what the overall look what the overall look is like. The overall look is kind of pretty boring, right? It's like this half circle. Go ahead and add the spot where my ankle is. This is where the ankle is. It's not this part in the back. It's not actually the ankle. This is the ankle kind of here. This part is the heel, beginning of the heel. And what I always say is don't try to start with the fiddly details first. Start with the big base shape and then work from there. So a paw is actually made of multiple bones. If you were looking at a human foot, and I hate drawing human feet, they have the same number of joints as a human finger. That is 3 joints. the 3 parts. I guess it's only 2 joints unless you count this knuckle joint here. But it's basically made up of these 3 parts. So you get your toe, your middle section, and then this part joins the body here. So when you make your shape here, kind of keep that in mind. This part of it, this front part of your foot, will be where you have the paws. So draw your lines straight down from here, and then this line should go back towards the foot because that's where it joins. And you see here are your same 3 joints. Let's say you're drawing it from the front. Here's the same kind of half circle structure on your paw, right? Now, if you're doing a 4-fingered, like a four-toed paw, which is like actually how many toes a dog or most animals of this type have, really easy way to do the front. Divide this sucker in half, divide it in half again to get yourself the base structure. And then kind of slim it down until it's about the right shape. And I always cheat, and what I do about this is I'll make a couple of extra lines here. Make a line here across the bottom. This is where the paw pads are. So here's the paw pads. And then about halfway between these 2 lines, I'll make one more line. And this is where the claws are. And that's about how to do it from the front. If you're doing it from the 3/4 angle, if you're ever doing something from a 3/4 angle, always consider where you want your center line to be. It's the same as the face trick. What you want to do is basically take that center line here and say, okay, this is the center of my foot, right? You go ahead and add your foot structure. And when you add in the foot structure, make a note of where the center is. So this is the center. Here's my foot structure here, right? Your toes do not want to go down like this because this actually is a separate piece. This has its own substance, its own curve. So what you want to do at this point is, if this goes all the way down to here, this joins at an angle. So if you were looking behind the structure of the front part of the foot, it would actually go up from here and over. So instead of following this straight down line, your toes should be operating with this as the center line. So here's the actual structure of your toes. And then you still have a piece back here. That's the actual part here where your foot is sitting, right? Make sure that that is still in there. And this is a very sloppy rendition, so I'm just going to clean it up for you. that's how you do the foot from this angle. Now, you've mentioned squirrel and beaver paws. What a lot of people don't realize about squirrels, beavers, raccoons, bears, they actually are more like humans. They don't have a digigrade leg like this. They have a flat foot like this, what we call plantigrade. So when you're doing a plantigrade foot, you just kind of mark in your areas, like here's the ankle and here's the heel. And then you have the front part, which is your toes are attached here. And that's how you build the foot. And then you're thinking, well, what do I do if my foot's moving? What if I need to have it at a different angle? That is where these areas you have to keep in mind. So let's say the beaver's walking, right? The ankle's here. You bring your heel up. You have this structure at the bottom, which is the sole of your foot. And then the bend would be here across the toes. And whenever you're doing like any sort of motion, it helps to just break it down to these big base shapes. If you get into the fiddly details too early, you might wind up making a bunch of detail that is just wrong, where the structure is wrong. And you can usually tell if the structure is wrong, even if you can't tell what's wrong with it. Now for hands, again, breaking down the base structure, you have the big section here. That's the palm or the back of the hand. And then you have this area here, which is where the knuckles are, the first joint, right? If you're seeing it from the back, you'll see the knuckles here. And then the shape of the fingers go out from here, and they have their joints in them. There's one handy trick I found towards doing hands that are bent. And that is build a giant base shape and break it down. So let's say I want to do a hand pointing, right? Here's the base shape of the hand palm. And then do one finger. And then when I'm doing these separate ones, don't do each individual finger as an individual finger. No, that actually is just makes it more difficult. Take this as if it's one big shape. And the shape here is like this, right? And then break that shape down into the smaller shapes. And you get your hand. And it works with a lot of different angles and a lot of different ways you could have your hand moving. So I think I'm about out of time here. So if you enjoyed my tutorial here, be sure to check out my Twitter. And since a lot of people were interested, I'm going to go ahead and make some YouTube tutorials. So go ahead and go to my Twitter, leave me some messages on what you'd like to see tutorials on, and I'll get started on some of those. Thank you all so much for stopping by to my panel. And I actually have a sketch drawing panel later today. I believe it's at 5, it might be at 6, where I do free sketches, and I can also just talk more on any questions you have. Thank you all for coming. 6 p.m. Show up. I'm doing free sketches, and any further questions you have, I can answer them there.